Hi, welcome to Corinne's Picks. Today we have a incredible artist. We have an artist, designer, um, everything. We have Dana Kawano. This is the third episode of a series of episodes on her work. She is a ritual costume designer. We've talked about her work in, um, I guess, capturing the history of the incarceration of Japanese Americans on umbrellas. We've also did a whole episode on her work, really capturing the African American experience in ritual and costume through her work at Stanford University. And this episode, we're going to look very intently, very deeply on her work with a Korean shaman by the name of Do-hee Lee, who's a very prominent, I guess, prominent person in the Korean community. So, welcome to the show again, Dana.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So, let's talk about ritual performance. When we look at Do-hee Lee's work, I know that she is she actually Korean or Korean American?
She's Korean. She's a Korean national from Jeju Island.
Mm-hmm.
She moved here, I think it's like over 15 years ago. Yeah. And she has been doing her performance work. She's actually a musician as well as dancer. She teaches drumming. She works for Tamalpa Institute in voice work that can help people in healing. She's an amazing, amazing artist and healer.
So it's very interesting because this work that we're talking about today is kind of similar to the work you did on Afrofuturism or Afro Now at Stanford University, in that you're uncovering stories, uncovering myths. You're looking at ritual, at religion, at spirituality, and it's also deeply involved in the healing process of a people. So let's look at the work. I hope that you can take the lead in describing some of these images.
Okay. Yes, this is a performance that was done in Oakland, California. Um, it was called Time Weaves. And so the costume itself took like the stories and we wove them into this costume that was hanging above her. Then she moved into it and began her ritual performance. Do-hee is a channeler for deities. And in this picture, she asked me to make these costumes for the ancestors. Each on their waist is a scroll of which were to include the stories of our ancestors. And there were, I think, 8 to 12 individuals that were included. They held workshops to speak about each of their individual histories coming to America. They're all from different Asian cultures.
So Do-hee, I kind of feel is kind of doing something that Amara is doing, because I know there's a lot of trauma in the island that she came from. I know there was there was some kind of traumatic experience, that because of that experience, a lot of knowledge, a lot of stories, mythology was lost. The same way, because of the Middle Passage, a lot of the history, stories, traditions of Afro Americans were lost. So can you tell us a little bit more about Do-hee's history and that island she came from?
Yeah, I don't know a lot about Jeju Island. I do know that her grandmother was a diver, and in in their history, the women were the divers, and would actually go after food in the ocean. And, very strong women in their lines. Also, the shamans in Korea are all women. And that is an ancient history that is actually not looked upon positively. However, it still exists today because people still want to go to a shaman for healing. So it's interesting in that many of the what I find in the ritual performance area or in the ritual costume making and learning about the history is that throughout the world we have this indigenous base. And in that indigenous base, there's commonality between like the African experience and the Korean experience, or in any culture, basically. It all gets back to the earth. It gets back to the elements, fire, water, wind, So it's both Amara's work and Dohi's work kind of overlap at some point. In the Korean culture, they use different colors, and each of the colors represent an element. In the African culture, there's a similar thing, and then there's symbology. So that's where the overlap happens. And I found that through all of our cultures, when we really get down to the root, the indigenous root base of humanity across the board, it all gets back to survival. It gets back to the elements and how our ancestors prayed so that we can have food, so that we had sustenance, that we had shelter. And that's a common thing amongst all of us.
So can we see the video of the last image that we just took? Because I want you to describe the like little details that you put in that costume and what it represents, and what was your decision making like?
How time weaves the past and the current and the future. And so she asked me to be able to make a costume that could depict that. And so in the costume making that I do, it's a strange story, but basically through the process, I'm almost guided. I don't get direct instructions all the time on how to do something, what the end product should look like. We discuss the story that she's trying to convey, and I go back to my studio and I just start doing it. And in this case, I wove. So basically everything was woven into this costume. And during the time that I'm weaving, I'm thinking about my ancestors. I'm thinking about, the Korean ancestors. I'm thinking about all of our ancestors and how we have woven their histories into our current histories, our current time, which then becomes history.
Okay. So I want to look at some more images before I dive a little deeper. But so let's show the audience a little bit more of her work.
So this was what she called the general costume. There is a Korean name for it that I'm not going to even try to say. But on Dohee Lee's website, if you look up doheelee.com, she does an excellent job in explaining the deities and the stories that she's looking to bring forward, how each of her costumes or how each of her rituals are tied to the earth and our indigenous roots to bring forward the stories about earth, about the land, about how we move with them. So this costume was made and it was placed on an altar. And the ritual process was that the audience members would come in and they would write their challenges on the ribbons. And then they would tie those ribbons onto the costume. And that would be prior to the performance. And so once this costume is adorned with all of the stories and all of the challenges, then she would put that costume on and in the performance work them out. And so you would see her rustling her costume and working through all of the challenges that all of us have.
So do you see it the same way you describe the Afro Now project at Stanford in terms of, you know, there's a lot of trauma in the Afro-American experience for the last 300 years of being an American, but Asians have been here for, at least like 200 years as well. And, there's a history there that might be unknown to this generation. So how are the cast members and audience members wrestling with the subject matter?
Yeah, so in Dohi's case, she works with many different communities. And they span from Asia to, Latino culture, Latin cultures. So it's kind of very diverse across the board in integrating people. She focuses on how we have immigrated. All of us have our own stories on immigration, and immigration into this country is not easy. How we assimilate into this culture is not easy. And we all have our stories. And so she works with each community. One of the communities is the Bhutanese youth. Bhutan has had a very difficult history. Many of the children that I met spent their first 20 years of life in a camp. And then they opened up the doors in the United States and they were able to come here. So if you can imagine being like born into a camp environment and then being brought out of your country into the United States, at like 16 years old, and you're trying to figure out your life, that's its own trauma. That's its own history. But she also worked with the migrant farm workers and all of the ICE that has happened, with the immigration during the Trump administration. But there's just many cultures that she works with. In the African American community, in both what Dohi does and what Amara does, they work with each of those communities individually, and they do workshops. And then those workshops, they all often will make things, come up with their stories and symbology. They will write on cloth or whatever. Then that information is given to me. Those items are given to me, and that is used in the costumes that are used for the performance.
That's amazing. I just find that amazing. We're going to go to a short break, and then we'll come back and talk some more about her work. And you're welcome.
Yeah. I never knew when I would have to move, so I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day, I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
Did you know dragging chains can spark a wildfire?
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Welcome back to Corinne's Picks. Today we have a guest called Dana Kawano. She's a remarkable ritual costume designer. This is the third episode of a series of episodes we've done on her work. Today we're looking at the work that she's done for Dohee Lee, a Korean ritual performance artist. I have some questions before we look at some more of your work. When I met you, you basically were doing lots of sculpture, kind of, that reflected your inner experience with sculpture, with photo transfer techniques that you were pioneering on found objects. But it seems like your work is pretty much securely into the ritual performance costume design area. And I kind of feel like I'm witnessing another journey that you're making in this spiritual world, because all these shamans, whether Afro-American or Korean, because you're designing for them, they're kind of pulling your art along with them. And those are experiences that are not necessarily inner experiences, but you're kind of being forced to take the journey that they select for you. I mean, am I right in describing it that way?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. It started when Amara came to me in dance class and said, Dana, can you make costumes for me? And I said, I don't know, can I? And she closed her eyes and she goes, yeah, you can. And so I said, okay, I'll try. And that was with Our Daily Bread, and it turned out to be like 7 aprons to end up to be like 24 pieces. And then things just started from then. That show was remounted 3 times. So, it was just more costumes and more costumes. But I found that when I look at the ritual performance costume design versus what I was doing before, I have found that being able to do art that is meaningful and that goes beyond, just doing a still life or, a beautiful flower, that's all good too. But when it came to healing and being able to help people, I just couldn't think of a better way in being able to use, my art, my crafts, my time. And through the process of working with these individuals, they're amazing. They're just amazing performing artists, but not only that, they're amazing individuals. They're super insightful. We have magical things that happen. There's times that I feel like they read my mind. I read their mind. We are just able to bring together kind of like the magical forces of artists all together to create something bigger than ourselves and to help people. And that has been a driving force for me to keep continuing doing this work. It's like I love these people. I feel like they're my tribe. And it's been good. It's been good.
I also have an observation. When I saw, I look at your Ogungun designs with the strips of cloth, and they're multicolored and they move. And I look at Dohi with the strips of cloth or strips of paper that the audience have put into that costume, and it's moving. And it's just so interesting. Like, they're separate, but the imagery in my mind, they seem so similar. A goon, but I don't know the name for that character where she was trying to display, but they're similar.
Yes. And that it's interesting. I mean, I'm guided by their process. I mean, I definitely believe that Amara and Dohi are seers or channelers of spirit. And I'm here to help them to bring the message forward. That's how I view my job. And it just, I don't want to say coincidentally, but it is almost coincidentally. It's like some of them, they have performances like at the same time. And then all of a sudden they're asking me to do things. And I'm like, they don't know what each other are doing, but I'm like the point person in trying to create for them. And oftentimes it's almost the same thing. It's almost like, if, the fires in California and our pollution in our environment, pollution of our oceans are happening. Those environmental issues directly are reflected in the costumes that they need, because they're trying to push forward an awareness about us in how human beings are contributing to that pollution. And so, it's almost like they're in tune to what is going on in the world and what we need, and how it is that they can create work to help bring about awareness, to help us to resolve and to work together, moving forward. And so oftentimes it's very similar.
So I'm going to let's look at some more images, and I think we have another image and another video to see. So let's look at some more.
Yeah, so that is the general dress that's at the top, the one that people tied their challenges to. And also on the bottom, there are more. You'll see the white strips. Some of them could be names of people, the ancestors that people miss. And so this was the altarpiece that was created so that prior to the performance, people could contribute by putting ribbons on them. And then we took that dress off the top, and that is what Dohi performed in.
So that's a really interesting piece. I definitely want to show the audience what happened to that piece, a little piece of the performance where that costume was used. So let's look at the performance for a bit. I love the location of that piece too. It looks like you're in some kind of like private, secret space.
Yeah, it was a basement, and she was actually trying to ground the space. It's a performance space, but this was in the basement that they were still working on, actually. Yeah, it's like watching that. It reminds me of that day, and I often help performers put on their costumes, and in this case, I said, Dohi, all right, I'll see you on the other side. And we didn't really know how long the performance would be. I mean, it was kind of like she does ritual, and it was for ritual to ground that space. And, it's in the heart of the Mission District, which, there's a lot that goes down in the Mission District in San Francisco. And she was at that for like 2 hours. And so if you can imagine standing on that little table and moving like that in different ways for 2 hours. And she comes down from it later and she goes, how long was I up there? And I said, like 2 hours. And so, yeah, the next day she goes, yeah, I don't know why, but I'm so exhausted. And I said, I know why you're exhausted.
I think the costume was very successful. I didn't realize it was a skirt and wings. But we do have to end this show. I want to thank you. I really appreciate you coming on the show 3 times. It's very generous of you. And I just really feel like the community here and this on the East Coast really needs to see this work. It's very important work, especially in these days. Thank you so much, Dana.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So if you would like to see more of Dana Kawano's work, you go to kawanodesigns.com.